All right. Well, I mean, I guess let's do that. It's welcome everybody to this Agile thing. That's Mike Markey,
And
and
that's Matt Bean.
that's all true. Before we begin, a little housekeeping. Obviously, I look ridiculous today. I went to the eye doctor and they dilated my eyes, so I look a little bit like a cartoon character. I
A
get
little
that.
bit. I can't name which one though. No.
Yeah. It's you cannot legally actually because this is
If we were using Zoom, I could turn on the dark glasses filter and I could look just like you.
oh, that's a thing, isn't it? Yeah,
It
we
is,
should have done that. Maybe
but
next time.
no. I'll have to just I should get just two big googly eyes. Just put them right here.
You should wear those around 100 like all day.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really gonna. That's how they know the coach is approaching. The googly eyes.
Yes, it's always watching, never blinking.
Yeah, like the thing on the dollar bill, the
Yeah.
triangle thing. It's
And then you can do this and roll your eyes.
eternal vigilance for waste.
Sweet. I
So
hate
we,
waste.
oh my god, it's the worst, isn't it?
Sure is.
So we have a sort of a topic this week, I guess. It's about the evolutionary database design. It's sort of emergent design applied to the idea of the data store. This is not a new thing, honestly. Um, but it is interesting. It's come up recently in discussions that Mike and I have had. And so I went out and I looked at the internet. And Scott Ambler's got some stuff. There's a number of places. But like, what would you say? So we'll make a little game out of it, Mike Markey. If you were to guess, so for app code, right? In
Yeah.
Agile, we break big chunks of value into small deliverable chunks. We focus on vertical slices.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on getting all the way to done, so that we get feedback from the actual customer. We focus on technical excellence so that we can do this stuff, practically speaking, and it's not a huge veil of tears every time we try to deploy to production and get feedback. That's for app code, right? We've known that for years, been trying to do it for years. But, applied to the data store, a database, right? I mean, what do you think the principles are in terms of doing easy, not easy, but, efficient emergent design when it comes to a data store? Any guesses about the principles that might apply there?
Well, I mean, I would take it. I would not leave the app side of things for the conversation if I were to talk about a simple case, right? So when we talk vertical slices, we should not only be talking about the vertical slice of what's on the screen, but what's in the background, going to the business logic, the data layer, the data store. Uh, so the simplest case is your vertical slice should include database items. So whether it's entries in the database, it's schema that is necessary to store those values, to the APIs for retrieving those values. Um, that's where I would
Interesting.
want to start the conversation. Like this is
Interesting. So you're saying that principles might be exactly the same ones
I
we
would
use everywhere else? That's
I
the thing
would
that I was struck with. It was like, this stuff already. In my experience, it seems to be, and yet again, so much of this stuff in Agile and trying to introduce Agile is that it's not there's technical challenges, right?
Mhm.
But the human factor is the hardest part, right? It's the way that people think about the problem. It's what people already know that just might not be true that is always the blocker. And so for this, it seems like, yeah, we've trained a generation of people who are database analysts and admins who just know that this is going to be like real. And it's not to, I don't mean to denigrate them. I'm just noticing a human psychological sort of pattern, and it can become an impediment sometimes if you're trying to move more towards business agility. Like the default position, or like the normal way of looking at this, is that this is just too hard. We can't do this for databases,
well
right? Just the same way that we knew we couldn't do it for app code. What do you think about that?
okay, so I think that what we've seen over and over and over again is that when we talk theoretically, we talk about using Agile, applying agility, or using agility, applying Agile. I don't know how you want to say it,
Works both
but
ways.
taking these Agile principles and applying them in the real world often runs up against
Mm.
a reality
Mm.
check. right? We have
Yeah.
situations in many organizations that don't allow us to just make simple changes that we deploy to the outside world with the flick of a switch or the snap of a finger, right?
Totally.
There's something more in the way, whether it's process, whether it's regulatory, whether
Yeah.
it's penetration testing,
Security.
security. That's the word I was actually looking for.
Much less
Not
ambiguous.
it is, and also a little less controversial, I think,
Yes.
in
Let's move on.
terms of the type of testing that we're doing.
Indeed.
But the point being, a database that supports a simple web application or a simple phone app may not have the same stringent structure around it than, say, a database containing medical information for patients, or
Yeah.
a person, basically PI, personally identifiable information.
PII, I think, is what they would call it. But yes, totally. Yes. Personally, I think it's
Yes.
personally identifiable information.
Well, isn't it like PI? I don't know. Sure, we'll go with that.
I think you're thinking
Pi.
of IP,
I
which is
like.
intellectual
I
property.
like. I like. I like pie.
I think you should have plenty of pie. I think you should watch your blood sugar.
The
And
world is so much better with pie.
indeed,
All right.
mathematically speaking, that's correct. So I'm looking at Scott Ambler's thing, and he notices some. And by the way, it's great information. You should go look at it. But
And we
he
should
actually
put
goes
the
so far.
link in wherever we store this so people can find this stuff.
What a great idea!
I like that idea.
Action item, note to self. But he actually goes through and what are these? Vertical slicing, clean data architecture, clean database design, refactoring, agile data modeling. He goes through all these and he says, he goes to the trouble to break out advantages and disadvantages. And in the disadvantages column, there's a lot of themes that are
Mm-hmm.
common, right? Basically, this stuff requires clean architecture, full stack data capability. Investment is a word that comes up a lot, right? Investment to keep stuff clean, investment in the technical ability, the DevOps we'd call it nowadays. Yeah, everything's harder at scale and everything's harder in regulated environments. So definitely that's true. It's always struck me though, when I've been in a regulated environment, I guess if I could break down the essence of the approach, there's an existing regulatory approach, or an existing approach to making sure that you comply to the regulatory stuff.
Right.
And those, I think the acronym I'm thinking of is common requirement sets, right? There's this voluminous business requirements documents about how all this stuff basically can be demonstrated to comply to the
Yeah.
to
And
the regulatory stuff.
and oddly enough, the complexity of those systems or those processes mirror the complexity of those organizations. They have, for you know, a
Probably a
well-known
coincidence.
a well-known saw that we often take ourselves back to, right?
100%.
So we end up with these situations where we come in and we say, "Hey, software people, this is a pretty simple modification to the way that you guys work. We're going to partner you up with your product folks. Your business is going to be right there. You're going to be working together hand in hand, dogs and cats living together. It's going to be fine.
Pure
Don't worry, it's
chaos.
all going to be fine."
Yeah.
And we go and we get them involved in that, and then it turns out we need to interface with other systems within the organization that are held behind a wall of secrecy, voodoo, and otherwise hobnob, where they say that we have this giant database that you cannot just come in and make changes willy-nilly to our database. This is there's a business behind this, and we cannot afford to make mistakes, and we cannot afford to put any of this stuff at risk, or just. And so suddenly there's approvals you have to do, there's designs, there's prep work you have to do in order to gain access to those things. So that is, I think, part and parcel of a lot of the struggle we see in people going, no, database is so long term. We can't just do a 2-week change on our database. We can't allow you to influence our database in only 2 weeks. What are you thinking?
Right. No, that's not how we do stuff here.
Yeah,
It's 100%. No, the Department of Voodoo and Hobnob is always, it's impenetrable. And the vice president of Black Magic is always
I hate that guy.
very, yeah, well, he's doing his job the best he or she can. But I'm thinking back to what we essentially told these people, or how we essentially we said, you can take your existing regulatory hyper defined principles and you can translate those into certain agile artifacts, processes, roles in some case.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you've got a thing where you need to make sure if the person, logs in and the login goes to actually their account, right? That can become an acceptance criteria. I'm just oversimplifying here for the source of the sake of the discussion. But this thing that's intended to make sure that people only get access to their data in a strict regulatory, way, that can become an acceptance criteria, right? The idea that the PAI is always protected. These things can become definitions of done, right? So that the team knows, oh, at all times this data shall be acceptable, accessible, but only by the people. And here's how we will demonstrate it. It's a process of translating the way that they get to certainty now
Mm-hmm.
to another way that they can get to certainty in a process that allows for rapid iteration and small batch sizes and quick feedback and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Does that
I'm,
sound high level?
yeah. I mean, but we do we espouse those principles all the time, and yet we still run into this natural resistance that this is different, and we encounter this is different so many times in so many roles. Whether it was originally it was testers, and look how integrated testing now is into what we do, and then it was other roles, let's say technical writers, or let's say eventually it
Hmm.
got to be web design people or UI UX folks, right? UI UX was, oh no, we're different. We can't
A
be a part
different
of your,
department,
yeah,
right?
we can't be part of your reindeer games. We have our own reindeer games.
Totally.
And later it started to become, for me anyway, it was architecture. We would run into architects who wanted to be that outside aloof
Hmm.
slower determination of how things go
Yeah.
and didn't want to be in the rapid iteration thing.
Yeah.
And I wonder if some of that, a lot of it is these, well, okay, I can't generalize. I'd love to, but I can't generalize.
Mm-hmm. You could, but
But
you
I
don't want to.
but I can say that in all those instances with the testers first saying we're different and we can't do things the way you want us to, when it was the UX people saying we're different, we can't do things the way you want to, we found ways to bring them in. And it turned out that the resistance was not based on the incompatibility of the agile model. It was based more on the rigidity of their interpretation of what they did. And to a certain extent, it was the same with development way back when, before we started going down an agile path. You would get developers who would say, how can I possibly write any code about this before you tell me what the design for the code is? How could I possibly write this until you tell me what the functional specification is and all these other requirements that came along? And everybody else had their own version of that argument. And I think architecture does too.
Yeah, it's almost as if the bottleneck here is not actually any sort of inherent quality or aspect of the thing we're trying to do. It's the mindset or the way that we approach it. It reminds me of how people knew that a human being couldn't run a mile in less than four minutes. And then I think his name is Roger Bannister did. And then the next year, like 3 people did it. Like, I don't remember exactly what but suddenly people knew it was possible, and then they just started. They did it, right.
Yeah.
It
And then
seems
they,
like it's not a really a thing about software. It's about how people understand their limitations and become willing to play with them,
yeah.
maybe push past them.
Yeah. So, I mean, we start with these limitations, and so there's certain repeated mantras that you hear. And one of the things that, and I'm going to keep going back to the past where, a developer would say, if I work in small iterations on something, does that not mean I'm going to be revisiting the same code more than one time? How
Mm,
can that be efficient? Right.
mm,
If I'm going to be, and then later, if I'm going to be testing your incremental changes, does that not mean I'm going to be executing the same tests over and over again? How can
mm,
that be efficient? And the whole
mm.
question always comes in. Somebody is worried about efficiency. Somebody is worried about rework. There are people who are just wired to go, I don't want to retread the same path again. And they find that
Yeah,
to be bad.
it seems like it's built on a. I don't want to offend anybody, but it seems like it's built on a sort of a naive understanding of how you get to value and get to stuff that works, right? It's not everybody would like, you've seen these things on LinkedIn where you have a thing. It's, how do you get to the next level? It's not a lineup. It looks more like the stock market, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have, you make progress and you make retrenchments, and because the whole point is you don't know exactly how to get there. It's like crossing a stream, right? If you go straight across, you'll drown, right? And so if
Or
the
you'll
most,
destroy Zool.
I don't, is that Luke's father?
No,
Oh, I
I
did it
believe
again.
that was Ghostbusters.
Oh, okay, got it. The streams, crossing the streams.
Yeah, crossing
So,
the streams. You said it.
yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
and
I don't.
I totally derailed you. Sorry.
I'm
So
just
we're trying
pattern
to cross
matching.
the streams.
What do I know? Yeah, that is it's. I mean, when I worked at one of the best places I ever worked at, we ran the test over and over and a thousand. I mean, we had like tens of thousands of things that we'd run every night.
Mm-hmm.
The key was it was automated and everybody was asleep at the time, and so it wasn't a problem to redo work. And so it's to me, I wonder if it's really more about trying to basically approach it through the lens of efficiency versus the lens of value, right? I mean, if you have to touch the same code 3 times, but you end up with more value in 2 weeks, right? Um, would you
Yeah,
really rather not do that than make sure that you only do it once and create less value?
yeah.
I mean,
I,
this is
I.
it's a rabbit hole we could go down, but like it's yeah,
Right. So now we have architecture and we have database scientists, data scientists, whatever the database people. We have they're to me they're closely intertwined because it seems that architecture has declared themselves to be the guardians of the database.
yeah.
Um,
With that little
so
raccoon who talks, or am I thinking of a different things? I'm thinking of Guardians of the
Guardians
Galaxy.
of
I'm
the
sorry.
Galaxy, yeah, okay, yeah,
Please be.
sure.
Yep.
Rocket Architect.
Again, haven't seen the movie. I'm sure
I'm sure you have
it's a
seen
valid
the
reference.
movie.
I haven't. I should see it. Um,
No.
yeah, and there's also this sense of like not playing. So one of the principles of Agile is that you should share what you know, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that there's a growth mindset, and like if you know something and then you teach it to somebody else, it doesn't make you less valuable. It makes you good at collaboration, right? And your job should be to be learning constantly and helping other people learn. And but that's not. Sometimes people approach it from this idea of if everybody knows as much as I do, then I'm in a worse position. And so
What do you
it's
know? You go,
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Hmm. I was
So
being distracted by my open cabinet.
I know I didn't want to say anything, but I was like, I cannot believe he sat down to record this
I
thing
can't
with the
believe
door open.
the door to the paper stuff.
Yeah, literally didn't notice.
Yeah, I know, but I did. It was right there. It was right there on the
Yeah,
screen.
I hear you.
So, so in semi-recent history,
Hmm.
the question came up because, and it was driven by architects who wanted to take the let's call it the efficiencies that we had been driving teams to try to achieve through swarming, through iterative delivery, through vertical slicing, and throw the brakes on it and say you could do all that, but we can't allow you to iteratively modify the database.
Mm, that's too hard, too risky, too
And yeah,
something.
because and so and it was just definitive, can't, don't. won't,
Shall not.
shall not do.
Yeah.
So the consultant will say, can you help me understand why?
Exactly. I'm sure there's a valid reason. Let's explore that.
There certainly is something that made you feel that this was a very hard line. And can we explore that line and see if the justification for it is actually there? Maybe the process around which you are required to make changes to the database has its feet firmly planted in an old world way of doing things, and it does not grant you the freedom to choose your path that there is,
Totally.
right? So maybe the amount of time necessary to make even one change to the database versus a lot of changes is the same, right?
Hmm.
Maybe the
Right.
cost of any change is high, right?
Totally.
So in that case, you could see them wanting to bundle a bunch of changes together prior to going down that path. Um, and so what would we do in that case? What might Mr. Ambler have suggested in that case?
Yeah. I've never met Scott. I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth. I would. I mean, the thought that occurs to me is, first of all, they probably have. This is a smart person, right? And they probably have good reasons for. First thing I would do is approach it with humility, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to be like, oh, that's a dumb decision made by dumb people. I would never do that. And the closer you get to it, you realize, oh, these are smart people doing the best they could under constraints that I don't know about.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, don't look silly.
So how can I sit there and tell you your constraints are wrong, right?
Yeah,
And
it's the
why would you
reality.
listen to anyone who did that to you?
That's a better question, right?
Yeah.
Just to maintain your credibility and to be able to help, you want to understand that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really so. Yeah, it sounds like it's hard to make changes to the architecture there if 8
Well,
changes are as
yeah.
costly as one. It's certainly way more risky, obviously, but
Right. Now, I have no validation that that's actually the case. I think that there is a cost to doing it because they have to do regression and testing. And maybe, perhaps, their automation is not up to the task. Right.
this is the first thought I had. It sounds like they have to do a bunch of stuff for every single architectural change.
Mm-hmm.
That there might be an opportunity to have a robot do it instead.
Yeah. And maybe, the thing that makes easy, the thing that can contribute to the cavalier attitude of doing a deployment to a database or some change along those lines would be the speed with which you can retract that. Right.
Safety.
Yes. Like it's like we always, we go back to this all the time, and many people do. Amazon makes thousands of changes in a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's as simple as an A/B switch. We flip the switch and we go, "Does it work? Nope. B."
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon's got obviously it's one of the best technical reputations in the industry, but I'm pretty sure I've seen them fail. Like I've
Yeah.
been sitting with my phone and like looking at my order history and it just fails to load, and I refresh and oh there it is, right? And I would bet money that somebody did a deployment and it broke something and they found it right away and fixed it, and so
Yeah.
it wasn't that big a deal, honestly.
Right. So if you can roll back a change that easily, then the cost of doing that rollout is far smaller, and the voodoo that surrounds it can be lessened, I would
The
hope.
hobnob maybe that's harder typically, but
Yeah.
that's why they list them separately.
So given that, and now the thing that we run into, and where we've run into the resistance from different fronts in the past, it's because they did not see a path forward, or they could not imagine a world in which they were working in a different way.
Or it was
We
so seems so risky or scary if they'd screwed something up and exposed the wrong data or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did glance at the Agile database technique stack that is in one of the links below,
Mhm.
and they talk about things like vertical slicing and clean architecture and design, and that builds on agile data modeling and builds on database refactoring and automated database regression testing and continuous database integration and configuration management and all that fun stuff.
Mm.
And that each one, vertical slicing, I like this one, is enabled by clean architectural design, which is evolved via agile data modeling, which improves implementation via database refactoring. Um, validated and made safe by automated database regression testing, automatically invoked by continuous database integration, and pulls files from configuration management. Ooh, doesn't that sound great? And then I look at some of the practices that I see in an organization, and I look to see if they have these, right?
Mm. Yeah.
And so when I'm looking at, and these are smart people who are trying to do right by
This is
making
the
changes to
key.
the database, right? They know
Yes.
what they're doing.
Yes.
And then you listen to what they're talking about and you realize they never talked about vertical slicing. They never talked about refactoring, right? They
Mhm.
they don't talk about refactoring. And when we say refactoring in the agile space, we mean go in and clean it up, fix it, make it more efficient, do whatever you need to do. But in a sense, make it ugly first and then make it better, right?
Do a shitty first draft, and then refine it. Make it. I think the essence of it is to make it easier to maintain. Make it
Yeah,
easier for the humans that follow you without changing the behavior of it. Is
yeah,
really, I think, the key. Yeah.
that would be the key thing. And you
Yeah.
don't really hear that. So there's a couple of, and certainly not the continuous, right? They're not making continuous changes. So some of the elements of the agility data delivery stack is missing from their worldview,
Interesting.
right? So how do you
Hmm.
introduce it? Or could you, yeah, and maybe what you need is build from the ground up, have good configuration management, get to the continuous database integration, right? And then, you
Yeah.
build your way up to the ability to do vertical slice changes in the database.
Yeah. I mean, everything's harder when you're coming from a legacy system because these things that, like all those things you just listed,
Mm-hmm.
each one of them is connected to the other one. Like you can't just have one of them, right? It won't really give you much if you have, stuff. You
Yeah.
build. It's great if you can build your whole thing from a configuration file, right? But if you're now have the automated testing or the deployment, that you don't really get much value. I mean, you get some value, obviously, but the key is putting all these things together into a coherent system.
Yeah.
So
and
it's
and and then there's further complexities that you can run into based on the way that an organization deploys teams, like
mm,
if they're doing, if because a lot of times you'll make a change to a key field in a database or the way an index is used or something, right? And it's going to impact many pieces of the system, and it probably in fact goes beyond the scope of a single team,
totally.
right? So how then do you coordinate those changes? Does somebody go into everyone else's stuff to make sure that the changes are made? Do you have to
Yeah.
collaborate among a bunch of different uh you know
So, Mike, if
yeah.
you want to talk about team topologies, just ask about team topologies.
Oh, hey, why don't we talk about team topologies? I don't know.
I'm just, it
But
just strikes me that this is it's one of the major themes of that book that they just came out with a couple of years ago. It's to say this is in fact, they're just talking about this one. Multiple teams needing common functionality, right? And
mm-hmm.
the option of being, well, let them all roll their own things that are incompatible, and or recognize that it might be an opportunity to develop a platform team, right? Where some team takes ownership of this stuff. And the key is they view it as an internal product.
Mm-hmm.
So the stream aligned team, the product team, can just pull this as same way that they would pull an open source thing, but the product management and the internal platform team is what makes it, lets them understand that it's relevant to their product teams. And
Yeah,
yeah.
it seems like no matter what system you put in place, sooner or later you'll find a way to violate the boundaries of that system. Right.
Well, one of the keys is you can't, it's not a one and done. You have to continually sense if your teams are, the size of your teams are properly matched with the stuff they're responsible for. Because the idea is the cognitive load of what a team is scoped to do might exceed what fits in their brains essentially. And so you need to be able to restructure this stuff and reshuffle it dynamically.
That's an interesting notion. Like, as you're first building a system, the way you would construct your teams is different than when you're maintaining a system versus when you're modifying or enhancing a system. So that
I, again, I don't want to put words in the mouth of Matthew Skelton or Manuel Pais, but I think they would say that you need to continually sense. You need an organizational mode for sensing that stuff because stuff is constantly changing. I mean, the whole point of tech is it moves quickly, and like what works today won't be appropriate tomorrow.
mm-hmm.
And so you need to know how to dynamically move stuff into different buckets and different scopes of responsibility for teams.
Fair. Okay. So we got to get them to the table,
Totally.
so to speak. We got to have open conversations. I'm the one of the drivers that I'm facing on this subject has to do with a group starting a new PI, right? And
Hmm.
they would like very much to have some estimates on the work that they're going to pull into these next few sprints.
Mm-hmm.
That necessitates having an understanding of the work involved, which necessitates some notion of the changes that we would need to make to the data.
Yeah.
Right? Which is implying a design that precedes the work. And okay,
Or
so
a guess, but go ahead.
well, I was going for guess. They were
Yeah.
less comfortable with a guess. They
Yeah.
wanted some certainty because guesses could result in rework.
And rework results in people being disappointed or angry or not happy or thinking that's unusual or
I guess. So what's funny
yeah.
is they look at, so they would say that's waste. We have wasted effort because we didn't think this through
Hmm.
and we realized we made a mistake.
Hmm.
We maybe didn't pick the most efficient model. Maybe we didn't, whatever the, and so to some extent, the old school raises its head and says, we need a complete database design before we can begin development of any new features in that space.
Hmm.
Because the database is big and gnarly and scary and
I
has
wonder how they
always
can
been hard.
yeah, I wonder how they can demonstrate the the scope of the changes to the database is the proper scope given that we don't really know like how much of that stuff is actually going to end up in the product yet.
Yeah, and so unfortunately that's one of those lagging indicators. So you sit there and say, in my experience, I have rarely seen people be so good at planning that they make a perfect design that needs no modification later on. So they always end up having to pause, rethink, replan, adjust, add more scope in the middle to make up for it.
Yeah.
Therefore, and so it always happens. At least there's always at least one instance of that happening.
Well, it's software. It's infinitely
Yeah.
malleable. It can do anything you want. If you want certainty in your plan, go build a bridge.
Yeah.
Like
So,
this is
and
harder.
so I think there's still ways to have uncertainty in a bridge, but point being,
Point
we're
being.
going to have, we're building this plan with the assumption, or they're building a design with the assumption that we're going to get it all. We're going to get it all right. And all you can do is say, all right, well, let's give you a shot to prove that you can do that.
Yeah.
right?
Let's run this
I would,
experiment
I would,
again.
I would prefer you didn't, but let's give you that chance, right? Show everyone, show the world that
Show
this
me
is
the
the
money.
only way.
Totally.
So, and but let's put conditions around that. We,
Guardrails
we
so that we don't have too big of a failure.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what's it going to take to show that this was an invalid approach or a less valid approach, or maybe a suboptimal? Let's go with
Yeah.
suboptimal approach. You're
There you
very
go.
concerned about optimal. You're very concerned about efficiency. So therefore, if your way of doing things results in inefficiency, you should not like that method. You should be looking for a way to improve it. And then we can have a conversation, right?
Totally. So you're asking them to measure the value that they create and demonstrate it and have a
Exactly.
conversation
So
around
what
that.
is
Yeah.
the mean time to your realization that you made a bad plan?
Mm.
Like how long before you figure out that you made a mistake?
Yeah.
Was it even a sprint?
I mean, if you
And
look at
if
it the
it,
right way, you realize every day that some part of this plan is slightly flawed, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So then you can go back to the original argument. Are we, are we, are we fooling ourselves that we can, like, we got away from doing the big upfront design in the software world because we knew it was not practical, it was not reliable,
Yeah.
right? So we allowed ourselves the recognition of the fact that we would do this as a series of experiments in which, and we would be started sooner, and we would deliver something for review faster, and therefore we could provide feedback that we're making progress.
Yeah.
And I don't think the database is any different. When you get right down to it, if your design cannot be stable and reliable and is going to have change anyway, then all that time you spent making that design was potentially.
I'll say it. Waste.
Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you for
You're welcome.
saying it. It might be potentially waste.
It
So
could be.
how do we reduce that waste? Maybe make smaller changes. Make make a smaller
Maybe look.
design. Maybe.
Totally. Take the list of stuff we were already doing and broaden our understanding of where that applies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And much the same way as we took the other roles and we said, okay, let's start by maybe cutting it in half. Let's make it a shorter horizon and see how short we can pull this in and still deliver value. And we have found that we can get that down, in some instances, down to a matter of days, if not a matter of hours to changes. Right. But, you know, the common conceit is we can do it within at least a couple of weeks. So if you can get the same, bring the time frame down on your database change, make a less impactful mistake, and see if that can be, maybe we have to evolve them into it.
But let me just take the devil's solicitor opinion here. And Mr. Markey, doesn't it kind of feel like we are pounding a nail with a wrench?
In what way?
In the sense that we're trying to address or assuage the concerns about the plan with some agile principles or processes or something. And I wonder if maybe the real problem doesn't lie in the process space. Maybe it's at the level of human beings just really wanting certainty, right? And just really being super uncomfortable with the idea that the best we can do is come up with a direction and a hypothesis and a tight set of guardrails about how we're going to know that we're on path or not, and a commitment to continually making incremental adjustments, but that fundamentally what we're doing is we're driving through fog as a metaphor, right? Or it's just we can see as much as we can see, and beyond
As
that,
opposed to waiting till the fog lifts.
That's why it's a bad metaphor. Maybe
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's a perfect metaphor, actually.
Interesting. Yeah, so there's a limitation to how much. Obviously, you get the point. Our vision is limited. Our ability to predict is limited, and just understanding that is it's the water. It's no, I'm not going to use more analogies, but
No, but
you just have to get used to that. You have to
I like
accept
the
that.
analogy for a couple of reasons. One is that the fog lifts and you still can't see beyond the horizon,
There you go.
right?
That's the thought that I couldn't get out. Yep.
Yeah. So, and we fool ourselves by thinking that we've got this down sometimes. And there are very smart people who have put themselves into certain roles or have gotten themselves into certain roles through years of experience, right? There's no denying that when you see architects in an organization, they're generally regarded as some of the smartest people in the room, right?
Absolutely.
They've got the most experience. They've seen some things,
Yes.
right?
The
So,
gates of the Tannhauser thing or whatever.
oh, I like that.
Yeah. I don't really know what that is, but they've definitely been through some stuff, and they're very smart people, and you need them, right?
Yeah.
And we're not trying to dump on them.
We absolutely are not trying to take any of that accomplishment away from them any more than we're trying to take accomplishment away from a lead developer or a lead tester or anything. All we're doing is we're saying, you're all still folks, you're all still people, and people still are imperfect beings, right?
100%.
And what we're trying to do is bring together the right elements in the right combinations to be as effective as we can repeatedly.
Yes.
So
Yes.
come to the party, come to the table, join us in this expression of creativity and quality.
Yeah, we need everybody at the table, and we need to just all understand and practice those 4 basic rules of architecture. I mean, you have to know when to hold them, you have to know when to fold them.
Walk away.
And
That's a
I
good
think
one.
maybe run is the 4th one.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, everybody knows that.
Well, there was something about not counting your money. Anyway.
Yeah, there'll be time enough for counting when the deployment's done.
That's true.
So have we drained this? I feel like this is.
I feel we're at the bottom.
Yeah,
of
Kenny
this
Rogers equals done. All right. So that was
an agile thing.
That was an agile thing. Figuring it out on the fly. Screw it. We'll do it live. That's Mike Markey. I'm Matt Beam. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.
Bye.